It all started on a rainy afternoon when Alice Morgan, a struggling writer, stumbled into an antique shop on the corner of an old street in downtown New Orleans. She wasn't looking for anything specific, just a distraction from the endless writer's block that had plagued her for months. The shop smelled of dust and age, filled with relics from forgotten times. In the back, beneath a dim light, sat an old, rusty typewriter. Something about it caught Alice's eye. Its faded brass keys seemed to call out to her, and she felt an odd connection. Without thinking twice, she bought it. The shop owner, an elderly man with sunken eyes, hesitated before selling it. He warned her, his voice low, "That typewriter has a dark history. Be careful what you write." Alice brushed off the warning as part of the old man's attempt to add mystery to the sale. After all, it was just a typewriter, right? Excited by her new purchase, Alice brought the typewriter home, setting it on her cluttered desk. She was eager to see if it could break her creative block. As the rain poured outside, she sat down and began typing. At first, the words didn't flow easily, but then something strange happened. Her fingers moved on their own, and the words appeared on the page almost as if the machine had a mind of its own. The more she typed, the more natural it felt until she realized the story she was writing wasn't hers. It was a dark tale of murder and revenge, with details she didn't recognize. When she stopped typing, she felt an eerie chill in the air, and the rain outside seemed to pound harder against the windows. The words on the page stared back at her, haunting in their vivid detail. But that night, she slept soundly, thinking it was just her imagination running wild. The next morning, Alice woke up to a strange headline in the newspaper: "Murder in the French Quarter. Man found dead in suspicious circumstances." The description of the crime scene was chillingly familiar. It was exactly what she had written the night before. Alice's blood ran cold. Could it be a coincidence? She hadn't published anything, hadn't even shared the story with anyone. Panic started to set in, but she convinced herself that it was all just an eerie fluke. Determined to shake off the feeling, she sat down to write again. This time, her fingers typed out another gruesome story. This one about a woman found dead in her home, surrounded by strange symbols carved into the walls. When she finished, Alice was drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. Varsalen Mettenth next day. The news confirmed Alice's worst fear: another murder, just as she had written. And this time, the name of the victim matched the name she had written in her story. The realization hit her like a freight train. Whatever she typed on the cursed machine was coming true. Terrified, Alice decided not to write anything for a while, but the urge to type was almost unbearable. The typewriter sat on her desk, taunting her with its sinister allure. She tried to ignore it, but the temptation gnawed at her soul. As days passed, strange things began happening in Alice's apartment. Shadows shifted in the corners of her vision. Objects moved when she wasn't looking, and at night, she heard the sound of typing, though she hadn't touched the machine. One evening, she woke up to find the typewriter on the floor, pages of stories she didn't remember writing scattered around her. Each page told a new, horrifying tale of death and despair. Alice felt trapped. No matter how much she tried to distance herself from the machine, it was always there, demanding her attention. Desperate for answers, Alice started researching the typewriter's origins. She visited the antique shop, but it was closed permanently. The building itself looked abandoned, as if it had been that way for years. Digging deeper, she discovered that the typewriter once belonged to a famous writer, Thomas Everett, who mysteriously vanished in the 1940s. Everett had been known for his macabre stories, but after a series of murders eerily matching his tales, he disappeared without a trace. Rumors circulated that he had made a deal with dark forces to enhance his writing, but the price was steep. His soul was bound to the typewriter. Alice realized with growing horror that she was now the latest victim of this cursed object. The more she wrote, the more lives the machine would claim. The typewriter's influence grew stronger each day. Alice found herself drawn to it, unable to resist its pull. Even when she tried to destroy it, throwing it out, smashing it with a hammer, it always reappeared on her desk, pristine and ready for more. One night, she blacked out while typing and woke up with blood on her hands. The letters of her name burned into her mind. She had no idea what she had written, but she knew another person would die because of it. Her body no longer felt like her own. The typewriter controlled her, and she feared that soon she would lose herself completely to its dark power. As the bodies piled up, a local detective named Samuel Gray took interest in the case. He was known for his sharp instincts and unorthodox methods. Gray noticed a disturbing pattern in the murders, one that led him to Alice's writing. He approached Alice, sensing that she knew more than she was letting on. At first, she denied any involvement, but the detective was persistent. Alice, desperate for help, finally confessed to everything: the typewriter, the stories, the deaths. Gray didn't believe her at first, but Alice showed him her latest story, written in a trance. It detailed the death of someone close to the detective, his partner, who was found dead the next day. Gray, now a believer, urged Alice to stop writing, but she explained that it wasn't that simple. The typewriter had taken control of her. Every time she resisted, the machine would type on its own, choosing new victims. In her research, Alice had found a possible solution: a ritual that could break the curse. But it required a sacrifice, and the consequences could be deadly. She and Gray decided to attempt it, knowing it was their only chance to stop the killings. They gathered the necessary items for the ritual: a rare, forbidden book, a mirror, and an ancient relic tied to the typewriter's origins. As they prepared for the ritual, the typewriter's keys began clacking on their own, typing furiously. The air grew thick with tension, as if the machine knew they were trying to stop it. At the stroke of midnight, they began the ritual. The typewriter shook violently on the desk, and shadows moved unnaturally around the room. The typewriter's malevolent spirit lashed out, trying to break their concentration. As the ritual reached its climax, a deep, guttural voice echoed from the typewriter, demanding a price for the curse to be broken. It wasn't enough to simply perform the ritual; the machine demanded blood. Gray, knowing the curse needed to end, offered himself as the sacrifice. Alice screamed in protest, but Gray was resolute. He believed that this was the only way to stop the typewriter's reign of terror. With a final prayer, he slashed his palm and let his blood drip onto the typewriter's keys. The machine let out a horrific screech as smoke billowed from it, and the entire room shook. In a last-ditch effort to save them both, Alice threw the typewriter from the window. It smashed into pieces, and the eerie feeling that had consumed her apartment instantly dissipated. Gray collapsed, but he was alive. The curse had been broken, but at a terrible cost. The murder stopped, and Alice felt free for the first time in months. She and Gray remained close, both changed by the horrors they had experienced. But despite the peace, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Alice returned to writing, but this time with a pen and paper. Life slowly returned to normal. But every now and then, she heard the faint clacking of keys, as if the typewriter's ghost lingered just beyond her reach. Months later, on a quiet morning, Alice received a package at her door. It was an old typewriter, identical to the one she had destroyed. Inside was a note that simply read, "You can never stop writing." And with that, the terror began again.